Now, multi-party coalitions in South Africa have proven to be difficult to manage, with politicians accusing each other of sabotage. One of the latest conflicts saw the Democratic Party accusing the ANC of not wanting coalitions in Gauteng to work. For more on this, I am joined by political analyst Professor Susan Booysen. Professor, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Katlego.
Now, Professor, coalitions seem to be a growing phenomena in the politics of South Africa, and I mean, so much so that you've even written a book on it. What we've experienced from the last number of years with regards to coalitions, how is this contributing to the direction that our communities are taking?
Yes, indeed. We see so much of the community conflicts, community proportions of support for different political parties, and the growth of support for opposition parties, especially tiny, fractional, small opposition parties. We see the ANC support declining. All that is just reflects what's happening in the communities. And this is, of course, has got a big effect on government in South Africa, especially where the ANC controls now far fewer municipalities. 70 of the 257 municipalities in South Africa are now under coalition government, as we show in a book that I edited for the Mapungubwe Institute. And this 70... we don't hear so much in the public about all of them, except we do hear here and there about a motion of no confidence, etc. But there is a lot of activity that's happening. The instability that we see in the big metros, that is often replicated just on a smaller scale in many of these communities. And yes, those communities, the proportions of parties directly from the grassroots.
Well, certainly, and speaking of grassroots, Prof, when one votes, they are often enticed by what the political party sells them, so to speak. So what do coalitions mean to the man on the street?
That really means it can be positive and negative. Positive, we've seen here and there sprinklings of positive governance practice coming out of coalition politics, where small political parties that would normally not have had a voice in a majority government, but are an essential part of a coalition government and helps that bigger party to form its majority, where they can come in with bigger bargaining power, say, and ensure that their particular communities or a certain segment of the community in general perhaps get better attention to their needs than would otherwise have been the case. We've seen it in previously ANC-controlled municipalities, previously Democratic Alliance-controlled municipalities. So that is on the positive side. However, on the negative side, we've seen so much negativity, instability, focus on talking, negotiating, maneuvering, trying to form the next majority in a municipality. That kind of politics, party politics, getting much more time than deliberation on how to effect policy, how to make sure the communities benefit from a particular government's time in power. We see a lot of that, and that detracts that kind of politics and forever trying to outmaneuver the majority party. That consumes a lot of energy, and it's quite distracting takes attention away from those imperatives on the ground.
From the work at hand. Now, I want us to hone into the province of Gauteng. I mean, the DA at the coalition helm of the three metros within this province believes that the ANC is on an offensive to stage a coup in all three of these Gauteng metros that are under the multi-party coalitions. Are these votes of no confidence any effective, especially when it comes to service delivery?
Well, it's fascinating. First, the DA remark that this is probably all the political parties do that when they have a chance to construct and maneuver themselves into majority. So what the DA is accusing the ANC of is, I believe, is certainly true, and we see that. The ANC itself has said it aims to be in power in the three metros, but the DA, when they have the chance, they certainly put together those kind of majorities as well. And this kind of turmoil is very reflective of South Africa's emerging culture of coalition politics. Because coalition politics, depending on how they are founded, these coalitions founded, and the rules of operation can really be very constructive. But in South Africa, we see this political culture still taking shape, and a lot of destructive politics go into that. But hopefully in time, as South Africans, as the political parties, realize more and more that this is the type of governance future that we'll have in South Africa, they hopefully will be able to accumulate much more of a positive culture. And coalitions will hopefully in future be better negotiated, more firmly established, so that there are serious agreements on policy directions, so that the coalitions are not so susceptible to change and disruptions, and also rules of agreement on how these parties should operate, like if there is a conflict. And this is recently what we saw in the case of Gauteng, in the case of Tshwane in the last week, where Action SA had first threatened to vote with the ANC, which would have asked it, been successful against the DA mayor, but then it was pulled back into the coalition agreement, where there's a coalition oversight group, where they could take the conflicts through and agree in certain ways, and there will probably still be action against the DA mayor, but it is a different way, and the Action SA then didn't have to go and form a new alliance, even if temporary, maybe, with the ANC in order to get that issue, get attention to that issue.
Prof, you speak of South Africa being pretty new to coalitions. Surely there are countries that are more mature and then have gotten it right. Who could we look up to in terms of what they are doing and how they are getting it right?
You know, Germany is always cited as a very good example of successful coalition politics, but really the world over. But in Germany, for example, just the thoroughness that goes into negotiation agreements, where multiple political parties could possibly form part of a configuration that controls power, and the pre-negotiations, then through pre-negotiations, selective partners are selected, and then once that is broadly selected, then they go into details of what are the policy programs that they will be pursuing, how they will be going about to implement those policies. And then they also go on the operational side. They have conflict resolution mechanisms within the coalitions to ensure that if conflicts arise, if personality differences arise, then there are ways to resolve it, which all political parties had tied themselves to beforehand. And it's that kind of operation that one should look for in South Africa if we're looking for lessons on how to operate successful coalitions.
Is it more about political power than it is about the merging of ideologies and ensuring that service delivery is executed at every level regardless of who is in power?
Yes, in South Africa at this stage it's so much still about power and remaining in control. The ANC, as a declining dominant party, finds it difficult to cede power where it suddenly is not in a majority anymore. In the Western Cape, several of those municipalities had previously been under sole DA government and now are in coalition, so it happens from that side as well. But these political parties find it very difficult to accept that they are not the king or the queen of these municipalities with sole control over so much resources and potential patronage networks anymore. So that is a big factor that plays in. And yes, of course they mostly deny that it's about power, but it's so much about power, because power also goes hand in hand with these patronage networks. And then we even get some of these smaller political parties like Action SA, to some extent, very much a party like Patriotic Alliance, which is just a sprinkling of councillors, but very often in the small municipalities, that one or two councillors can really make a difference. And they say outright, like its leader, Gajan McKenzie, says, it is about power. We look where we can get power. And these small parties, we saw it in the previous regime in Nelson Mandela Bay as well. They're very often coming, and it's just a question of which of the bigger political parties will offer the small party the mayorship or deputy mayorship. They aim high, and sometimes they're really successful in getting those positions. Disproportionate power that they then have, because they have king or queen making power in those municipalities, and they can call the shots because they can guarantee a majority for a bigger party.
Prof, we look over to the 2024 elections. Could we possibly see a coalition at national level? And if so, what would South Africa look like under a national coalition?
Yes, that is certainly a possibility that's been arising. Also, if one looks at the line of decline in ANC support and at recent public opinion polls, even if it's way before the elections, but there's a distinct possibility that at national level South Africa can go into a national level coalition, different types of coalitions. You know, the ANC goes below 50%. They can decide whether just to form alliances with small, I'd call them top-up parties that can just help them to get to the 50% level, or they can decide to go with the EFF. We saw in recent weeks reports of the EFF talking about possibly going in with the ANC, but also talking about their kind of motives and modus operandi in that, which means it wouldn't be plain sailing for the ANC to go into that type of coalition. You know, or it can go into a coalition between the two biggest parties, or an inclusive type of coalition, a new government of national unity, which South Africa was really a coalition government in 1994 for those first few years. So there are many forms that this kind of coalition government can take. But hopefully the lessons that are transpiring, emerging out of local level practice now could help inform practice at a national level, even at some possible provincial levels like Gauteng. It's a distinct possibility. In the past, the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal had been coalition governments at provincial level, and it worked to some extent. But hopefully more and more lessons can be accumulated, and when we get to that type of coalition politics nationally, sooner or later we will, that it can be stable and constructive and exactly with the interests of people at heart. But political parties would really have to grow up in order to get to that point.
Most certainly. Thank you so much for your time and your insights, Professor. It's always appreciated. Thank you for joining us today. That was Professor Susan Booysen, who was giving us an update with regards to coalitions in the country and across many municipalities and what we could possibly look forward to come elections 2024. More of your top stories in a moment.